Okay, we have some question from the cast, and I think this is just going to be a very casual Q&A. So we'll just ask the question, and if you have an answer, by all means tell us. If not, we'll skip and go to the next answer. Our question. Is that
Sounds
cool?
good. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I will ask first since I'm the director, blah, blah, blah. I'm wondering if during this whole process creating this musical, was there an element or a moment that is like super, super challenging, like the music or casting? Like what is that one element that is super, super challenging creating the Wild Party?
Well, on the large scale, and more so now than it used to be, but on the large scale, it's just getting your show on is a challenge, is really the big challenge. Sondheim said in an interview that we talk about all the time at the Dramatists Guild Foundation, where I serve as the president of the board. He said in this interview, he said, when I was coming up in the theater, you would write a show, put it on, write a show, put it on. He said it's harder and harder to put it on. And writing is also putting on a show. Like you learn so much about the show as you do it. And so I got lucky with the Wild Party. There wasn't really any part of doing the Wild Party that proved slow or challenging. From the time I started writing it to the time it opened at the Manhattan Theater Club in January, started performances in January of 2000, it was about 4 years. And 4 years is a really pretty short development time now for a musical. In those days, in the middle of 1996, I had written the first act. I took 6 months off. I guess the hardest part was not earning any money. That was probably a little challenging. I used to live across from a donut place, and I would go and get a giant corn muffin at about 11 a.m. and have an enormous cup of coffee, and that would be all I ate until some Chef Boyardee canned ravioli or something for dinner. I had no money and weighed like 30 pounds less. So, that's just how things were when I was in my early 30s. And but it was in those days you could put on a reading, a developmental reading in New York City for about $1,000. The expenses are very different now. In order to do a reading, if I did a reading of the Wild Party today, in the same way that we did it in 1996, it would cost $30,000. What it would cost for the actors, for the stage managers, for the whole expense, just the bare bones expenses of putting it on, $25,000-$30,000 probably. And so we have to, you have to write so much more clearly and consistently and with many drafts before anybody will even put on a reading of your show now. And so so I would say, and say your name again. I want to be sure I pronounce it correctly.
Why? Just like the question.
Why? Thank you. I see how it's spelled, but then I wasn't quite sure. Why? I feel very fortunate. The Wild Party is one of the easy ones for me to go from idea to the stage.
Very cool. Let's throw it to Leanne or Alexis. Leanne.
Okay, all right, I'll start. I think my question is how did you envision the ending? Because I didn't get to see the off-Broadway production, and like, how do you see Queenie at the end of the show?
I love this question, and it'll spark a story. So the poem ends famously with the doors swung open and the cops rushed in. And that was the poem on which the Wild Party is based, for your audience who may be watching this if they're not members of the team making the show. And hello, if you are a member of the team making the show, hello and thank you. I had written an ending that included that, and where everybody got caught, everybody woke up, the door, literally somebody sang, "The door sprang open," and the cops rushed in, crazy music, blackout. And it was really, it was very literary. It's wonderful on the page, but it wasn't on the stage. And so we went through, as musicals do, they go through many iterations. There are probably 25 Oh yeah, I bet you 20 to 25 actual songs. Maybe 15 songs and like 10 bits that aren't in the show anymore, that I have in a pile of, it's all digitized, but it's all like songs that are cut from the Wild Party. And when we did the workshop in the summer of 1999, we did a 4-week workshop, and we were encouraged by our producers to be bold. So we were like, well, what's the bold ending? Well, the bold ending is that Queenie takes the blame, that Black gets out. And despite our desire as an audience to see Queenie succeed, it's kind of like Nora in a doll's house, to see her walk out the door, which is the ending we chose ultimately, which is the suggestion that she put on her coat over her, underwear, and put on her shoes, and she left. And like, she never, you don't know, did she leave for good? Did she come back for later? Did she go get bagels? Like what, but that's, for me, that's great, interesting theater. It's like to leave the audience with a, where's she going? And there was that wonderful production that Jamie Lloyd directed recently of Doll's House on Broadway with Jessica Chastain. I don't know if any of you saw that on Broadway, but when she left, they opened up the back of the theater and literally opened up the hangar door that's the back of the theater, and she walked out onto 45th Street, and it was 46th Street, I think, 45th, yeah, because the entrance is on 44th, I think. And it was like, it was so freaky because you're like, you're in Norway, but like she's out there in the, what's going to happen to Jessica Chastain? And I'm off track. Sorry, that's how my brain works. And so, so at the workshop in 1999, we decided to put Life of the Party at the end of the show and give it to Queenie. And so the cops showed up, but we didn't sing The Door Sprang Open and the Cops Rushed In. We started with, and the cops are there looking at everybody and starting to arrest them. And she goes, who needs money? Not me. And while that's going on, they're chaining everybody's legs together. And so when we got to that section, and who's it gonna be? That section, they were doing a kick line, but they were doing a kick line with shackled legs. Oh. So yeah, they couldn't actually kick. And so the final image was a bookended image of the beginning. The beginning, Queenie was a blonde. We had her sitting in a human chair made out of men. So the men sat, two guys were like this, and other guys were on the side, and some guy's back to her for the back of the chair, that sort of thing. And she was doing her makeup at the beginning of the show. And at the end of the show, they made that human chair again. She sat down in it, and she would sing, and you could be the life of the party if you were more like me. And as that music was happening, someone came from behind the chair with a metal bowl, and the bowl came up over and onto her head, and the whole room, all the lights went, and they clearly electrocuted her. Because that is what might have happened to somebody who was convicted of murder in the 1920s. They electrocuted her and then blackout. And there was the audience. We had an audience for this workshop. We had several hundred people. And it was like what they expected springtime for Hitler to be like. Where it was like the lights went out and they all went.
Awesome.
And so we said to the producers, we said, you told us to be bold. And they were like, we didn't mean like that. Like they were so freaked out because it was about as bold a thing as you could possibly have done. And it wasn't anything anyone wanted to see, but it felt true. It felt like that's how this story could end. And that, of course, we realized we had to make it also something where the audience would want to say, that was good. Like it's very challenging when it's live. A film is something else, right? Maybe if we did a film, we'd go back to that ending. although it's still pretty brutal. And instead create and restored, took maybe how did we come to this away from the character of May, who originally, it was written for her originally. And she sang it after Eddie got beat to death, not to death, but beat to hell. And then she sang, how did we come to this? And we took that away from that character and gave it to Queenie for the end of the show. And that's how it became the ending it became. And the notion is that you have to have some sort of hope, and that the hope is that she knows it's a hell of her own making, but it's a hell that she can walk out of. And that's the answer to that question.
That's an amazing answer.
It is a great answer.
Wow.
Yay. Okay, Alexis, what's your question?
You may have answered this like a little bit in that, but I was curious about, I guess, what was your, what would you like the audience to take away from this show? Or what different things? Because I think of this show as so much overindulgence, but I love what you just said about like, she created this mess, but she can also walk out of it and make a change, which is nice. So anyway.
I always, what I want now and what I wanted when I was 31 are different. I'm 60 now. And so what I wanted when I started writing the show, well, the first thing was, I never really know the reason why a particular story or set of characters attracts me and makes me want to go down the very long road of making a musical. If I knew the reason, I would make a crappy musical, or I would find it uninteresting to make and therefore write a crappy musical. And I have written some crappy musicals, but I still loved the story we were telling, and we just couldn't get it right. So that's the first thing. The first thing is I was attracted by the poem and the nature of who these people were, and there was something mysterious about that story and the pain that those characters were in, that I also felt at that time. There was a sense of, I personally had a sense of, in shorthand, I didn't behave like those characters, but I wanted to. And I knew enough to protect myself physically in that period of my life. But emotionally and spiritually, I did a lot of things to hurt myself, and took a long time to crawl out of that hole. And the Wild Party was my, like everything I write, it's really just my own will, my own desire to figure out a particular problem or issue, or focus on a particular idea with a set of characters that is interesting to me. And I thought the Wild Party was very interesting. So I don't enter a show thinking what the audience is going to think, or writing towards hope, an outcome from them. At the same time, now with all this perspective, I think what I was writing about was that some people got, some people did not get at the time. But I think what I was writing about was, the story goes from A to A prime. There's not a lot it doesn't go very far in terms of the storytelling, but it's about the notion of how bankrupt living and bankrupt lives leads to bankruptcy, and that as a morality tale, I found it really fascinating that these beautiful, quote unquote, people, and that was always my intention, is that these people were really sexy and really attractive, and the kind of people I wanted to surround myself with in my fantasy life. And they were the kind of people who would never give me the time of day at a party, and wouldn't talk to me at a bar, and wouldn't let me into the velvet rope. Me, Andrew. And I got to be the puppeteer and make them and control them and to tell them what to say and do. And there's some weird psychodrama playing out there that I acknowledge in my own space, my own self. but it also drew out that music and those words from me. And I was very grateful for that, because there's an immense amount of repression and passion flying in all directions at times in the Wild Party, which is exactly where I was. One of the negative criticisms of the show that I will never forget, because you always remember the bad criticisms, you don't remember the good ones. The bad, one of them was, it was said, it's watching the Wild Party, it is as if, it's as if Andrew Lippa is 15 years old and has discovered his penis for the first time. And I think what the writer was getting at was that there was a juvenile or puerile sense of sexuality in the show. And I've never seen it as juvenile or puerile. I've seen it as completely id-driven. And that when we are completely id-driven, life goes off the rails really fast. And the id-driven can be not only sexual behavior, but it can be in all kinds of aspirational behavior. It can be in government leadership, it can be in corporate leadership, it can be in spouses who abuse their spouses. It can be in all kinds of relational experiences. And so over time, I've felt like the Wild Party is a challenge to those people who think they're in charge, to check yourself before you wreck yourself, but do it in the most entertaining way possible, so that it doesn't necessarily feel, in the way that Cabaret, for example, doesn't feel like an admonition to reject fascism, even though it's clearly an admonition to reject fascism. But it's a friggin' fun ride. And so you get to the end of it and you're like, oh, I'm susceptible to that, aren't I? And that's what the Wild Party, I would say the Wild Party owes, its greatest debt to Candor, to both Cabaret and Chicago, and to Joe Mastroff and Bob Fosse, because they were the co-writers of those of each of those shows. And there's no wonder that John and Fred were my biggest advocates when the Wild Party came out, because I think they saw a continuation. They saw that I was in some ways paying homage to them, and I was, because I was really I was inspired by those shows.
That's fabulous. Okay, so our birds have this question. What's a small detail in the Wild Party, a lyric or a motif or a choice, that almost no one ever comments on, but you love deeply?
Oh, heavens, what a great question. I suppose it's, there's that chord progression, but more it's that little figure. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 figure that shows up, like that sort of thing at the end of Make Me Happy. It shows up at the end of Poor Child, when we to make her mine. But that figure somehow says to me, this show, these people, that experience. There's a great score from a film in the 50s called The Man with the Golden Arm. It was a Frank Sinatra starrer, and the score was written by Elmer Bernstein. And what is that chord? You gotta go listen to it. It's the great. It's the coolest 50s swing. I don't know if you know the theme to Dragnet. Bum, ba-dum, bum. everybody knows that little one.
Yep.
But the full version of the theme to Dragnet goes bum ba-dum, bum, ba-ba-dum, bum, ba-ba-dum, ba-ba-dum, do-ba-dum, 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 ba-da, ba-ba-dum, ba-ba-dum, goom, 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 goom. Then it goes off like crazy. Do you know the Cowboy Bebop? You know that theme? That owes itself to those things from the 50s. If you don't know the Cowboy Bebop theme, that's just like that's you know, that kind of music is still going on, and so that's those crazy fourths and also the idea that I did that throughout the score. Great voice leading. I've gotten really deep into music geek. Sorry.
We love it.
So they teach you, you know, they teach you in music school, you know, you're in C major, you know, but it can also be, right? So the tritone can go here, or the tritone can go here. Sorry. So you know, it actually could do that. And so when I do Queenie Was a Blonde, when we do and then you get you know, it's like that my teachers wouldn't have liked that. You know what I mean? They would have, of course, but that's not good voice leading. And also it goes from this E pedal to E minor. Ew. Right? And it's all slightly familiar, but slightly not. There's something wrong with it. Those are the things that interest me. All like just that. It's just something's wrong with it, right? It's like, will you do the tonight? And the fact that it stays there too. The idea, I learned that making the Wild Party is that you can stay put, you know, use very little material and stay there, and then just change it a little bit, you know, and that has a great amount of power. I mean, I learned that from, you know, all the greats before me. You have, and he does the same gesture, but it's the screwed up notes. Just goes to the 4, etc. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's the accompaniment to the Jet song from West Side Story. Okay, I've gone so far down the rabbit hole. So sorry.
This is so great. We have a show.
It's brilliant.
You. Yeah. We have one more question from our actor who played Black, which kind of a nice segue from what you just, you know, display from the piano. What inspired the shifting musical genre and style instead of just sticking with the 1920s jazz throughout?
The notion that I was writing about the 1990s as much as I was writing about the 1920s. And the idea that our collective imagination includes everything from the present as far back as we can go. There was one section yeah, that was like right out of Palestrina. It ended up getting cut. And in fact, this is from Verdi. So for those people who don't know Verdi, the 4th act of Rigoletto is a piece called Bella Figlia dell'amore. Bella Figlia dell'amore. Go listen to that. It starts with a tenor, and then it's the contralto comes in, does her little bit, and then the soprano, and then the baritone, and it's the tenor does the tune while the other people are doing all the other bits. And that's what Poor Child is. I stole that from Verdi. And so it felt to me like the musical ideas at the very beginning with this growling trumpet, and then right away you can have the, isn't that how it starts? Yeah, it starts with the growling trumpet, and then it goes here, whatever, and then when we do, and then the guitar, right? It's the same musical gesture, and then it's right. It's the same musical gesture, saying, "Hey, it's not just then, it's now." And there were some. Am I allowed to swear? Sure, it's the Wild Party. There were some assholes who wrote about the show, who were like, "They didn't have electric guitars in the 1920s," and they all sound like that, by the way. They didn't have electric guitars in the 1920s, and I'm like, go back to sleep. You know, I was like, that the whole point is to mash up now and then, right?
Yeah.
So the costumes don't need to look exactly like the 20s. Nothing needs to. You know what? There's the point where, there's no, well, there weren't cell phones in the 90s, so it doesn't matter. But even if you put it all the way to today, you wouldn't put cell phones in it, although I did see a production that updated it all the way to today and did use cell phones, and not successfully. But it's an interesting try, because they were trying to do that thing where it's like, we can, we recognize what the mush of it is. And so that's the canvas I want people to paint on.
Very cool. Do you have time for one more question, or you only have half an hour?
I have time for 1 or 2 or even 3.
Okay. Our birds.
Don't you dare do 4.
We'll keep it, less than 4. Our birds have one more question. Were there any lyrics or musical moment that you fought to keep in the show, even though a collaborator or producer didn't quite get that moment or get that song? Or
we had making musicals in New York City demand, in many cases, not all, but in most cases, a musical with a large cast, which this was, demand what's called enhancement. And enhancement is dollar bills from commercial producers, commercial enhancement. They don't get credited as being the producer at a place like the Manhattan Theater Club, but everybody in the business knows that they have the option, they have the rights, they've made a deal with the author, that if the show transfers to another commercial venue, then they're the ones who get the right to do that. We had commercial enhancement for The Wild Party because we couldn't have done the show at the Manhattan Theater Club the way we did it without those dollars and that support. The commercial producers are absolutely wonderful producers and had many successes throughout the years. But when they heard Raise the Roof the first time, one of them was just hated it, wanted to cut it, just thought it was I don't get it. What is it about? What is it doing there? And of course, it's this amazing entrance for this character, and it allows to sort of set the mood of the party right away. And it's hard for the actor. I think there's several songs like that in the show that are hard for the actors because they're not traditional theater songs in the sense that they tell a complete story, right? Raise the Roof sort of says what it says early on, and then the rest is about interaction, about what you do with the others, how it moves, how you build it in scale. It works much better in context than it does out of context. Life of the Party is that way too. Life of the Party can work out of context, but it's much better in context because it's about the behavior in the room. And so I think that's what that producer might have picked up on. And it wasn't a fight, but it was I was like, noted, I hear you, and we're gonna keep it. And over time, they realized, oh, this is, this is great. So we got to keep that song. And by the way, producers can't cut stuff. You know, they can ask you, they can yell at you, but they can't make you.
I mean, that is one of for me, it's one of the best songs in the show. I love that song.
Thank you.
Love that song. Any other question from you two?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So thank you so much.
Thank I just want one last thing is to say thank you and all of your colleagues for putting on the show. I'm fond of saying this to everyone I speak to when I do these Zooms or when I go visit shows, which is that you know, you're thanking me for coming to say hello, but the thank you goes the other way, really, because musicals and plays don't exist if you don't do them. They exist on the page, and I recognize that plays are considered literature, so there's a certain corner of the world where they exist as things that one can read, but musicals are not. You don't sit and read musicals, you listen to cast recordings, but you got to do them in order for them to exist. And so I appreciate you doing it. And of all places, Nebraska, I mentioned to my 93-year-old mother that I was going to be speaking to some folks doing a production of the Wild Party, and she said, where? I said, Nebraska. And my mother was like, they're doing the Wild Party in Nebraska? I said, I think they're a bit more forward thinking than we realize in Nebraska. Yes. So I'm delighted. Break a leg to everybody. I hope it's a big success for you. And thanks for having this conversation today.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Bye. Take care.